I don't really think I need to answer the question, do I? It's already obvious. I could have said it in a tweet. But when you think of Abraham and his brilliant idea, let's assume that Abraham conceived of the most powerful being conceivable, which later came to be known as the Abrahamic God. And when you think it was arrived at, how many thousands of years ago? 3,000? Let me just Google this. Abraham, when was he born? When did he live? Second millennium BCE. 4,000 years ago. Fancy that. And so the most powerful idea capable of controlling the hearts and minds of men and women was conceived 4,000 years ago. 3,000, I think. Is it 3, 4, something like that? So, in a way, you could say that we peaked. Humanity peaked when the most powerful idea conceivable was conceived by Abraham. And we also know that before Abraham conceived of his God, that the Egyptians tried, the ancient Egyptians, the pharaohs. We know of Akhenaten, who wanted to wrest the power of the priesthood away from them, and he changed the religion. He changed the pantheon of Egyptian gods from what it was to just Aten, which is a sun disk, which Egyptians could only worship through himself. And I think we know that there are difficulties about separation of powers. Well, some of us might know that the Hasmonean dynasty of Israel fell when there were shenanigans concerning the um, the king and the priest. So basically, they're supposed to be separate because the idea was that the king was an earthly power and the priest was supposed to interpret the laws and signs of God, and they had to be separate people. And this rule was broken, and eventually the Hasmonean dynasty ended. And I think the um, Church of England may have been breaking it, because the whole point of the Church of England was really to allow Henry VIII to become his own pope. And for the sake of appearances, he said, "Well, I'm going to appoint myself an archbishop, and he will be supposed to act as my conscience, as the previous arch archbishops were, because um, when England was Catholic, the idea was that the archbishop was a kind of governor general of Rome, telling the king what to do. But after the after Henry's break from Rome, he um, the the role of the priest and the monarch actually converged on each other. But for the sake of appearances, Henry had to say, well, somebody else other than myself um, is the is a priest, because it would just look, uh, unconvincing if um, Henry adopted the position of the convergence of earthly and divine power. So he knew that for the sake of appearances, he had to give the job of Archbishop of Canterbury, the priesthood, to somebody else, not himself. But in reality, as the Constitution says, Henry, or the monarch, the British monarch, is also the head of the Church of England. So this is one of those constitutional issues that are not particularly examined, but in the context of separation of powers, it is important. I think you can understand why it was such a big deal in a time of the English Reformation, because the idea was that the kings were supposed to be supported by the Pope in their divine right to rule. That was the purpose of the bargain between European monarchs and the Roman Catholic Church. Because the whole idea of the system was that the Pope derived his authority from God, and kings, if they were to be seen as just, would necessarily have to derive their earthly power from a higher power than them, and that would be the Pope. It worked for a bit when the barbarian kings of Europe didn't know any better, but as soon as they got themselves a bit of an education, learned how to read Latin and Greek and history, whatever they learned, they started having opinions of their own, and they didn't quite agree with the Pope, and saw the Pope as another mortal and a political animal, and didn't see why they should obey him. So that is basically the fatal flaw of the Catholic Church. And Henry sought to fix the problem by making himself the head of his own church, but he also knew that for the sake of appearances, he had to appear to derive his authority from, well, someone else, higher than him, in theory anyway. Henry was known to burn archbishops at the stake. We know that Thomas Cromwell was burnt at the stake. Cardinal Wolsey had got himself into a bit of trouble and was being summoned from somewhere up north back to London, um, and he knew it was the end really, but he died of a heart attack before he had to meet the king. And so I'm trying to explain to you really the necessity of hierarchy, which the medieval monarchs understood, that even if they didn't really believe in it, they had to, for the sake of appearances, be subject to some kind of authority that is higher than them, or else be without authority altogether. Yes, for some reason I seem to have a lot to say today. Now I've forgotten what I was going to say. Yes, I was talking about the necessity of a hierarchy and the necessity of any earthly power being supported by divine authority, because really divine authority is an instrument of government, as we know from, well, way back to the times of the ancient Egyptians. We know that um, Akhenaten tried to change the political system because he wanted to be the one in charge of the rites of worship, and that was why he insisted that there was only one God, which was a sun disk, and the people, his people, could only worship the sun god through him, because he was the intercessor, and therefore he sought to sidetrack, marginalize the role of the priests, which under the previous system had a lot of power, because I guess there would be, the priest for Osiris and Isis and all the other ones, and I guess they were being divisive or quarrelsome, and he wanted to control it all by himself, and he did manage to do that, but only during his lifetime. And after he died, the ancient Egyptians reverted to the old system, which had a lot of vested interests. And even as we talk about who is higher, is a priest higher than the king? Is the king higher than the priest? It's a little ambiguous, isn't it? So technically, the king is supposed to derive power from the priest, but if the priest should displease the king can have him executed on some trumped up charge, and this has been known to happen in the reign of Henry VIII, when he got annoyed with his archbishops for failing to serve him in some way. Now, in France, there's a system called the Estates of the Realm, which is the first, the second, and the third estate, and this somewhat mirrors the Hindu caste system, because the highest caste would be the Brahmins, i.e., the first estate, which is the Catholic Church, and then after that would be the warrior caste or class, consisting of barons, warlords, who also occasionally rebelled from the king. And below that would be the merchants, and below that would be the labourers, and finally at the bottom would be the untouchables, who would be considered unskilled labour, unskilled manual labour, and this class is also still in existence in modern Western societies. And even if you tried to make your society classless, which is what the French revolutionaries tried to do, chanting their slogan of equality, liberty, equality, and fraternity, and the communists later. This is actually very difficult to manage, and we now see. Well, we know that communism has failed in the Soviet Union. We could be saying that communism has really ended in China, because there are, well, obviously differences in classes. If you're a member of the party, you would be, well, considered a member of the ruling classes. And there's something called Three Represents. And don't worry, I will talk about the actual title. The Three Represents China. So the Three Represents is a guiding socio-political theory within China credited to Jiang Zemin, and it is a development of communism. I must talk about communism too. Communism proper. So anyway, the three of them, the Three Represents, and what the first one is representing the development trend of China's advanced productive forces. It's a capital, isn't it? It means the owner of capital. To represent the orientation of China's advanced culture. I suppose it means academics. Three, represent the fundamental interests of the overwhelming majority of the Chinese people. So, try as they might, under communism, they couldn't really get rid of the class system. So we know that the communists actually talked about a people's democratic dictatorship. And what this really means under communism is that the interests of the owners of labor would be privileged over owners of capital, and the converse of a people's democratic dictatorship would be a dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, which is what the communists know as capitalism, what we have in the West. So as you can see, the background of this three-pronged idea is really to include people who are obviously not workers. And it's an attempt by the Chinese Communist Party to be more inclusive, and and obviously they have to encourage, owners of capital and owners of intellect, I suppose, people who are not, manual workers, to feel included, and you can't be mean to them, or if you discourage them too much, they'll leave the country, or not help the people, and so the idea of the Three Represents is to be inclusive of the, what I guess a hardline communist would call the bourgeoisie. So let me read this to explain the real thinking behind it in not my own words. Justification of the Three Represents. The Three Represents results from Jiang Zemin's efforts to grapple with the diverse class backgrounds of party members and their sometimes conflicting material interests. Based on Mao's premise that the Communist Party should serve the people, it became important as China's private sector grew to bring worthy people from all sectors who are loyal to the motherland and to socialism into the party. There you go. It's just confirmed what I've been trying to tell you. Jiang said that by representing Chinese people in three levels, the party used the interests and demands of the overwhelming majority of the people to replace the specific interests of people from different quarters, especially the class nature of the working class. As Xiao Gongjin argues, the innovation of the three represents theory was meant to complete the historical ideology transformation of the CCP from revolutionary party to ruling party. The CCP can keep its legitimacy under the socialist market economy or any system that is conducive to the development of advanced productive forces without promoting any revolutionary movement or keeping the ideal of egalitarianism. I'm sorry, I actually won't be able to explain this to you because it doesn't make that much sense to me. A party of the whole people would be a catch-all party that would include diverse and conflicting interests, to include all of the broad mass of contemporary Chinese intellectual, science, and technology workers, cultural workers, and economic managers in the category of the so-called middle class would weaken or even obliterate the working class. Okay, it's rather badly written. I believe it's written by somebody whose language is not whose first language is not English, but you can have a guess at what they're trying to say. And the three represents has echoes of the three estates of the realm that um, operated in the ancien regime of France before the French Revolution. So you can see that even the Chinese want to be communists, and then they thought, no, we can't just sort of say we're all this busy. There are some of us who are not workers. There are some of us who are business people, talented business people, and there are some of us who are academics, and there are some of us who, well, are very rich and can do so. So basically, it's actually unfair and impractical to homogenize the whole of Chinese society. And even the Chinese Communist Party came to realize it, and that was the reason for Jiang Zemin's explication of his theory of the three represents, which is really an act of inclusion of non-proletariat Chinese people. And this brings me to the latest stream by Caleb Morpin called Anti-Revisionism in the US and Britain. And actually, I haven't finished viewing it, but it's basically him talking to Harpal Bra and Jyoti Bra about the history of the Communist Party and how Stalin has been traduced by Western media. I suggest you watch it too, because if you're interested in political theory and its development, you will be, you should note that communism, as it is being presented now in the West, is, rather less organized than the kind of communism that China is doing. So you can see that the Chinese, are trying to define their principles and write it down properly, and explain it properly, and write it down, in a very organized and sophisticated way, which of course is completely absent in the West. So if you listen to that stream by Caleb, on Caleb Americans channel, it's just saying that, all these commies can't agree on anything. They basically haven't firmed up their principles. They kind of, swing right and swing left, and, one day they um, prefer something like National Socialism. I mean, without being necessarily mean to the Jews, and the next day they want, international Trotskyite communism, and then they basically can't make up their minds because the Communist Party. Sorry, the Communist Manifesto, written by Marx. I don't pretend to have read it, but anyway, it hasn't got those rules written down properly, because what Marx has done is, as a political philosopher, is basically explain why he thinks that a worker's paradise will eventually be reached through the process of historical materialism. And so basically, he's just making a prediction. And obviously, if you buy into the whole idea, then you'll be a communist and, want the whole thing to be true. But it's not detailed enough. And that's why all these commies are fighting, because, on the one hand, um, they want communism to work, but on the other hand, they have been seduced by social democracy. And also, in times of war, they will revert to nationalism. So even these commies are constantly being pushed hither and thither by the social, historical, and political forces. And the Communist Manifesto really doesn't contain rules. It doesn't say, oh, no usury, or no this, or no that, and you must always do this, and you must never do that, because that wasn't the kind of thing that Marx was doing when he was writing the Communist Manifesto or Das Kapital. He was really just telling you what he thought was happening, and what he thought should happen, but he never actually wrote down any rules about how communists should be. So in a way, communism is just as schismatic as Christianity. Now, I haven't read, Mussolini's book about fascism. I have read Mein Kampf by Hitler, but it's not okay. He basically says a few things that he'd like to do, and he says things for the general readership to show how much he understands social issues and culture, and I mean, if you read it, you will understand that he's trying to appeal to a broad-based audience. And as a book, it's not. It really isn't as terrible as the way people make it out to be. I mean, he didn't even say anything particularly awful about Jews. He was just saying, well, if they, if something were to happen to them, I wouldn't much care because they're so annoying, and that was basically what he said from memory. I didn't think it was particularly shocking, and it, I think it was probably enough to be considered respectable for the audience of his time, of his readership of his time. So, what Marx forgot to do is to write down the rules about whether usury is permissible or not. And you already know what I'm going to say. I'm saying that the Quran is going to be so much better because it's got all the rules telling us what to do and what not to do, and it's certainly much clearer than the Communist Manifesto. And yes, there may people, if they choose to, can quarrel over anything really, but for practical purposes, the Quran is is a good enough guide for enough people to understand well enough to implement its laws. Now, uh, returning to the original subject of the type of the title, um, if you want to be cynical and you want to say that religion, all religions are man-made, all scripture is man-written, then um, I can say, well, it's possible. It's possible that the Torah and the Quran are written by men, but I would go further than that and say, well, it has to be written by a committee of men, because I don't think one person is quite clever enough to write a book like the Quran. And I suppose he could be a very talented poet or a chronicler, but the rules, the do's and don'ts of the Quran are actually very clear, and obviously it's worked for the last 1400 years, so you can't really knock it for um, not working. And it has given Muslims a very strong identity, as even Islamophobes will acknowledge. And so I'm saying, if anybody invented uh, the Abrahamic God, well, we sort of already know it was Abraham who conceived of the Abrahamic God, or claimed to have met him and exchanged and had a conversation with him. And there is a suggestion that Moses wrote the Torah, or that he had something to do with being a mason, because the two tablets were obviously carved with the commandments, with all the other stuff written up later. We're not really sure uh, the sequence of events, and how the Torah came to be written, but anyway, we know what Jews are supposed to believe, and the most important part of the Torah really are the rules, the Ten Commandments. And I suppose if Moses was really the one doing it, um, he his genius must have been in reducing all these laws into just 10. I know some academics have been saying that the Torah was written well after the death of Moses. But in any case, the most important part of the Torah, whoever wrote it, whenever it was written, are the do's and don'ts of it. And that is what gives Jews this clarity of identity and purpose. And the Quran is just a more sophisticated version of it. And I'm saying the kind of minds that would have done this um, can only be male, can't it? It's almost impossible to imagine that a woman might have thought all of it. Well, also in the olden days, I guess women wouldn't be taught how to read anyway, so they wouldn't be able to do all the chronicling and recording of history and the writing down of rules. So I'm just basically saying that if God was invented, if the scripture were written by humans, it would have been the creation and invention of a man or men. However, and also, well, the other thing that I was talking about, well, who do you think would have invented the blowjob? It must have been female, really. I think it was a woman who thought, I just don't want to get pregnant, and therefore that would be the way to avoid unwanted pregnancy. I Okay, it's just speculation on my part. I'll never be able to prove either of my theses, but this theory is meant to reinforce the um, clear psychological differences of how men and women think and behave. And I'm saying, really, the both of them have equal power because, obviously, women would know the weakness of men for them and know how to manipulate it. And men also, well, the wiser men would know that they have a weakness for women and they have to make all these rules to protect themselves from women. And if they don't, they'll just get weaker and weaker and become women themselves, and then their civilization will just rot away. And this is what is happening. And I guess the pity of it is that it need not happen, but the decay may be too advanced to do anything about, because what I'm encountering is people who are apparently not understanding my ideas, or who sort of understand my ideas and then forget about it, who, well, I don't really know, I can't read everybody's minds, but they're being a little feeble about it, and that there's no desire for asking the obvious question. I mean, I know they hate my idea, but they can't even bring themselves to challenge it properly, and their uh, uniform reaction is non-engagement. And it seems to me, well, quite tactical, really. I was thinking earlier today that it's like a stalemate when you play chess. So you sort of know that if you keep, I don't know, moving one of your pieces, back and forth in the same way, and you will never be checkmated. And therefore, this is what you do, and you can do it until, well, the other side gets tired, and that's why you call it a tie. You call it a stalemate. And obviously it's not very exciting, and people get bored, but it works if you're determined to um, keep moving your pieces in a way that will um, prevent your uh, opponent for forever checkmating you. So all these people can do is make sure I don't win. But just because I don't win doesn't mean that they're going to win. In fact, well, they're wasting time and energy by not letting me win. Because if I win, then obviously you'd be on your way to solving the problem. But as it is, all I see is a kind of zombie-like emptiness of thought, of some, feeble intention to take the idea further, but just taking ages to ask the obvious question, or maybe a desire to avoid engagement altogether. But this is consistent with the behavior of uh, people on their deathbed in a dying room. And, obviously I'm the, rude person. I'm intruding on their deathbed and expecting them to, do all kinds of things like, get up and, do stuff and say things and whatever. And they're obviously not capable of it because, they're just there lying there helplessly, suffering from some kind of motor neuron disease. So even if they wanted to get up, they just couldn't because all the connections are not there. The motor neurons are no longer sparking. They can't lift a finger. Maybe they can't even swallow, as some people who suffer from motor neurons disease can't. They might be able to blink. I think that's the last thing that goes. They can blink in Morse code or something to say yes or no or whatever, and it's very sad because there's no unquestionable chain of command anymore, which is what you would have in a patriarchy, which has this structure of a pyramid, with the apex of the pyramid being in control of all the bits at the bottom, who will be doing stuff and directed to do this, for the group interest, but there's but there's no directing intelligence, as you can see. Like, well, what is Biden doing? He's saying things that don't make sense. He says, God save the Queen. Nobody thinks he's in charge, and his replacement is even more hated and feared than Biden himself. There is this sort of terrible sense of having driven off a cliff and we're just waiting to hear the crash and all die together. And in the meantime, I get people who, yes, thank you for buying the book, but you can't finish it, you really can't do anything more, other than, well, thanks for ordering the book. You can't make a start on it, or if you have, you can't finish it because you don't like what it says. It's boring or whatever. So that there's no ability for focused activity. I still get people who are trying to flirt with me. It's. I mean, obviously, it's degenerate. Why are you flirting with me? Why do you? Why would you do such a thing when I feel nothing but contempt? But then, it's a kind of, well, we've driven off the cliff now. We're just gonna, we're just waiting, for the crash that will just end all our lives. We have nothing to do now but to wait to die. And I suppose this is what happens when you have general atheism. because if you did believe in God, then everything would just be logical. You just sort of follow the laws because you want to get to heaven, and you just know you have to in order to get to heaven. You can't be, slouching around, pretending not to understand, but flirting with me because you'd rather not engage with my ideas, and you know, um, so it is really, and these are Christians, right? These are people claiming to be Christian and displaying through everything they say to me their atheism and nihilism. And I, I really cannot. Okay, I really cannot accept that I'm wrong because everything that is happening is confirming that my diagnosis is correct. So I was just talking to my mother, um, and she was saying, well, if they're not going to listen, well, why bother? Um, but then, it's like, but my diagnosis is correct, and and this is saying that, well, the market can stay irrational for longer than you can stay solvent, and therefore, if all the powers of Western media are determined to look the other way, then I guess there's not really all that much I can do. Recently, I've had some interest in a major newspaper saying that they were going to do a story about secular Quranism, and then they forgot about it because really, um, in my view, they just couldn't get CIA clearance. But and before that, there was somebody from the Sun. He wanted to do a story, but he couldn't. He couldn't do it either because his editor basically said he wouldn't publish it. So, I mean, how am I to interpret it? I could interpret it as a sign of failure. Oh, they're going to do a story, they're not going to do it after all. It's all CIA controlled. Or, wow, my story is so powerful that the CIA are telling journalists not to report on me. So I suppose the glimmer of hope is that, well, they might change their minds and um, platform me after all, and then we can all be secular Quranists by Christmas. Jay, why am I so picked to ask you a question? Aren't you supposed to be asking me a question? So I've got somebody called Trey Braswell. Hello. Um, which book is this? It's secular Quranism. Aren't you going to buy it and read it and review it at Goodreads? It would be helpful. So one of the things I thought I should have done is textbooks, yeah, questions to test your comprehension. I neglected to do that, so it's not there. Not that anybody's reading it. No, they can't finish it. They're not very good at reading. They don't like reading. Nobody reads anymore. And why would you pay to read a book, to read something you don't want to know about? Um, that I think is a problem. I mean, it's not a hard book to read. I don't think. So I guess my problem is I anticipate people they'll think like me, they will act like me, they will ask them the logical next question. If they don't like an idea, they would try and deconstruct it. And I've given them so many years to do it, and then they can't do it. And I guess they said, "Ooh, it's boring," and that's the end of the matter. And apparently, it's nothing to do with them. It's their country, it's their society, it's their civilization. But well, apparently, it's nothing to do with them. But that is because I only talk to low status people who have no connections. I only ask them to, well, speak to each other, find the most high status person that they know to discuss this idea with, and that person will in turn, find the most high status person to discuss the idea with, and so on until they reach the top. But all these men that I speak to, they are atomized, they are alone, and they literally dare not discuss these things with each other because there is no safe space for men. And so they just fester in their own little bubble. They I think it's enough to post their shit on social media and think they'll discuss something. Recently, I was reminded of a technique that a lot of people do. They think, oh, I'm intellectual, I'm middle class, I can talk about these things, and but what they really do is it'll be the other person says one thing, you get to say something, and then they get to say something else, and then you get to say something, and then the subject is changed. And if you are to insist on talking about it until the debate is won, assuming that there's a conclusion to be reached, I think there are conclusions to be reached, but I suppose there are more people more interested in avoiding these conclusions. And I mean, I will try to read their minds. Well, I guess it's not that hard. I mean, really, they don't want to do it. It's, a taboo, not just a taboo, but a whole bunch of taboos, because I am proposing to slay a whole herd of sacred cows, and they can't bear to discuss it. I mean, the shorthand for slaying that herd of sacred cows is secular Quranism, because it's going to change everything. One party theocracy, corporal punishment for sex offenders, and unmarried parents to be treated as sex offenders, banning of usury, abolition of no fault divorce, flat rate income tax. All these things would clearly be stepping on the toes of so many vested interests that I suppose most men are just transfixed by the enormity of it, and then they don't want to talk about it. And also they are Islamophobe, so either they themselves cannot talk about it, or they know that none of their associates can talk about it, and therefore they just prefer to look the other way, blame Jews, hate Muslims, talk nonsense to each other, and somehow derive comfort from, just sort of mumbling their hocus pocus to each other, which is really what they're doing. And that I suppose is, what I find so frustrating. But then they're neurotic, they're just getting ready to die. They're basically saying they'd rather die, and they're degenerate. They are so degenerate that they don't even care that they're not making sense. But that would increase the wrath of the matriarchy, because every day you hear some fresh humiliation, some fresh crazy policy, and again they don't respond. Again they just complain and talk about something else, and look away. And they're still not discussing secular Quranism. Quite a few commentators do know about it, but they're not talking about it, because, well, I guess they must be Islamophobes, or they're thinking, well, we'd just rather die post-Christian than solve any problem. It's all over anyway, and that kind of attitude. And the consequence of this kind of attitude is to actually increase the lowering of their status, the number of humiliations to come, because all these humiliations and lowering of status are shit tests by the matriarchy. It's like, we're going to do this to you. Nothing yet? We're going to do something meaner and harder. And it's like, oh, nothing yet? We're just going to, push the stake through, a few more inches, maybe until it comes out, on the other side of you, but just no response, just sort of neurotic mumblings, incomprehensible, incoherent ramblings that get nowhere, and just refusing to talk about the only thing that would actually make sense. So now we know, Jordan Peterson is going back to crap Christianity. He knows it. It's a corpse that cannot be resurrected, but they'll keep going back because it's still safe to talk about Christianity. Why doesn't it work? And so it's possible that they can get over it and say, well, we'll have to. We've gone through all the wrong ways of doing things, so we have to talk about secular Quranism now. Assuming we have children that we care about, or we want descendants. It's like, well, there's nothing else, so we have to talk about secular Quranism, or they will just carry on, talking about Christian nationalism and shit like that, and not understand their own history. And this would increase the wrath of their women who already despise them and want them dead, which is why they're importing all these foreign men into Western countries. And what they don't understand is that the sacred cows that I propose to slay are the welfare state. And it is a welfare state that has made all these men so degenerate and useless and contemptible and hateful to their women. And but I guess they're either ignoring it or they really don't know. But whatever is the case, anybody looking in from outside would know how weak and helpless and contemptible Western men are. They daily they see the meaning of words being changed from the original meaning to something stupid and decadent and obviously incorrect. And I'm afraid their humiliations will increase, because they are in fact behaving like people who won't fight, who have literally given up. So I guess they're just waiting for their deathbed to become their coffin and be taken away somewhere to be buried. And there's actually very little I can do because they literally feel no shame. Um, I don't think being nice to them is going to work because, if you're nice to them, they'll think, oh, she's weak, she's trying to, that they will mistake kindness for weakness, and they're basically carrying on in this way because the daring me to use force against them, and they know that, well, I have no police force, I have no army, and they're not planning to be moved by reason anytime soon. So, so if you think of a patriarchy as a shape, as a pyramid, then obviously that's what you want to have a stable society. You want a big base with an apex encompassing the elite, the people who um, think things and do things and get their orders carried out. And in contrast to a matriarchy, which I would say is the opposite of a patriarchy, so it would be an inverted pyramid spinning on its apex, about to fall over, and that is what Western civilization is. Is it beyond help? Maybe. I certainly don't pretend to know. But it's not looking hopeful just because, they're so, so what's the word? So feeble, so flabby, so contemptible in their stupidity and incoherence and their inability to face facts. So it's probably even worse than men turning to women. They have turned into infants, wanting, well, waiting for Nanny to change their nappies, and Nanny has left the building and sold them for meat, and they still don't realise it. And well, it's very sad. But anyway, I won't go on anymore. Thank you all for listening.